Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football for the Oregon Duck fans who've been rocking with the fellas for the last couple of years. You kind of know what time period we are getting into as we roll into the spring and summer months. Things are going to be picking up real quick on the recruiting trail, and for Oregon specifically in this 2026 class, which they currently hold the number one class in the country. You're already seeing things kind of get shaken up a little bit, most notably at the quarterback position, right? Jonas Williams sounds like at some point in the near future will be flipping his commitment from Oregon to USC. I want to talk about what that means for Oregon at the quarterback position in 2026, but I also want to talk about where Oregon is going on the recruiting trail in general as it pertains to the offensive side of the football, where you are seeing a very clear plan for Dan Lanning in Oregon. And that is we want to fill it up on the offensive line in this 2026 cycle. They're going after some of the best offensive linemen in this 2026 class. And I'll say this, I don't blame them for doing so, because you look at this crop of offensive linemen, especially at the top of the board, this is some of the better offensive tackle prospects we've seen come out of high school in the last couple of years. Dan Lanning in Oregon and I would love to hear some feedback from the Oregon fans with this talking point here. Dan Lanning in Oregon, they get a hard time on Twitter, on the message boards about not developing high school talent well enough, being too reliant on the transfer portal, which one I just don't think is real accurate to say. Now, Dan Lanning's only been there for 3 years. He is still building his high school pipeline up. But I think most notably, you look on the offensive line and say that that could be a position where if you're an Oregon fan and you're looking at this roster composition, you might be saying, hey, wouldn't mind seeing the offensive line recruiting take a jump in the right direction, because at the bottom line, you are looking at three transfer portal additions that are going to have to start for Oregon on the offensive line going into 2025. Now, credit Dan Lanning in Oregon for doing a phenomenal job in the transfer portal addressing that position, but it's something that, one, you don't want to have to rely on every single cycle, grabbing three starting caliber offensive linemen in the portal. And I think more importantly, you want to have good offensive line play. It's about recruiting those bodies at the high school ranks. You look across the country at some of the best offensive lines that we see in the country. They are guys that were recruited at the high school ranks and developed within the program. The best offensive lines in the country do not rely on transfer portal additions to fill in the gaps, because you recruit them well at the high school ranks and get them developed within the program. I think that's the reason you're seeing Oregon get so aggressive on the offensive line, which I absolutely love. Now, I want to start with the quarterbacks. Then I want to talk about the offensive line prospects that Oregon is going after. Before we get into it, as always, to the Oregon fans, one, would love to hear some feedback on what you think about the offensive line for this Oregon program. More importantly, we're going to talk about two quarterbacks in Jerry Curtis and Ryder Lyons. Who would you rather have? Let it fly in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into Jonas Williams. Now, look, I'm not going to get up here and say Jonas Williams ain't a good quarterback, because he is. We talked about him when he committed to Oregon in early August. Twitchy kid, really good athlete, can get outside the pocket, can make all of the throws. Now, if you're an Oregon fan that follows the recruiting trail pretty closely, yeah, of course, stinks to see Jonas Williams go to USC if that does happen. But you're sitting here saying we like two quarterbacks in this 2026 class, and you could argue that Oregon is kind of in that top crop for both of these kids. I want to start with Jared Curtis. Jared Curtis, it's going to be between Oregon and Georgia, at least what it sounds like early on. Now, he's going to visit South Carolina. He's going to visit Auburn as well. But as we speak right now, it's kind of Georgia, Oregon battling it out. This kid reminds me of Dylan Raiola a lot. 6'4", big body at 225. Very good pushing the ball down the field. I mean, he probably has pure arm strength, probably the biggest arm in the 2026 cycle. You want to bet on these kids all day long. And you look at Oregon, and maybe the step they're going to be trying to take on the offensive side of the football is, hey, we want to get a little bit more verticality to this Oregon offense. Jared Curtis will give you that in a very big way. Now, the one knock on Jared Curtis is he's still kind of developing as a quarterback. Really weird. You don't see this very often for bona fide five-star dudes. Jared Curtis started out his football career playing running back and kind of transitioned to the quarterback spot late in middle school, going into high school. Look, if you're kind of betting on, hey, maybe some more development that takes place, you certainly will want to bet on a guy like Jared Curtis. And the accuracy sometimes dips a little bit 56% completion percentage as a sophomore, probably lower than you want. I will say this after looking at some of the film, like he just pushed the ball down the field. So inherently, you're not going to have that 75% completion percentage when you're taking the amount of deep shots that Jared Curtis does. He's a quarterback that checks a lot of boxes. Certainly a top target for Oregon. Now, the other one that I probably prefer here is Ryder Lyons. Essentially a 2027 guy because he's going to take a mission trip after he graduates high school. What I love about Ryder Lyons is the athlete, at 6'2.5", 215 pounds, really good getting outside the pocket, really, really twitchy athlete that can kind of be a guy that makes things happen outside of the pocket and throwing off platform. To me, this is where the sport of college football is going. You want to be able to move your quarterbacks outside of the pocket. You want to be able to rely on your quarterbacks to be difference makers for your offense. Ryder Lyons is that kind of guy. This one sounds like it's going to come down to Oregon and USC. And maybe the Jonas Williams recruitment back to USC impacts Ryder Lyons a little bit. We'll kind of see again, kind of more of a 2027 guy. Guess what I'm trying to say here is you do think Oregon's in a good spot at the quarterback position. And one trend that you have to appreciate if you're an Oregon fan is quarterbacks want to come to Eugene. Like this has suddenly become a program that if you're an elite quarterback, if you're an elite wide receiver, you're looking at Oregon as a destination type program. Go back to, and look, Oregon's always done a good job on the recruiting trail, but as a guy that's followed the recruiting trail for a decently long time, this is kind of a new trend where if you are a good quarterback, good wide receiver, you almost always are going to give Oregon a look. And I think that's a trend that you want to see kind of continue if you're Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks. Now, the next storyline for me in terms of Oregon in 2026, we know they're going to get skilled position guys. It's just they attract those guys. The offensive line. I love Alik Terry. I think he's a very, very good, he's a rising star offensive line coach, one of the youngest offensive line coaches that you see in the country, and he's damn good at what he does. Let's talk about the top targets. Jackson Camwell. It sounds like Oregon is probably the leader in the clubhouse here. Now, that doesn't mean he's a lock to Oregon by any means, because there are a lot of heavy hitter programs that are going after Jackson Camwell, and for good reason. This kid, he's 6'7", 300 pounds, devastating power in his hands, and he's a phenomenal athlete. And you take a look at the athletic profile. He's a three-sport athlete that plays football, throws in the track and field, and is a really good basketball player. You see that athletic profile come onto the football field in the big way, starting with just the athleticism he has. I mean, he is a massive, massive dude at 6'7.5", 300+ pounds, really good athlete. When you talk about a guy like Jaquan McRoy that Oregon recruited in that 2024 cycle, Jaquan McRoy was a really, really big kid that was just nowhere near the athlete he needed to be. Now, I thought if he lost some weight and kind of got the body right, maybe he could become that athlete. We'll see if that happens. I believe he transferred to Arkansas. Jackson Campbell, he's got the size and frame, but he's also a really good athlete. And it's hard to find guys that go almost 6'8", 300 pounds that are the athlete that Jackson Campbell is. And then the other part of the game, what makes him that, in my opinion, truly special offensive tackle prospect is he's an elite track and field thrower. When I say elite track and field, dude, it is like one of the best in the country. And I ain't much of a track and field guy, but that's what I've read. You see that play out on the football field in a big way. I mean, devastating power in the hands, routinely moves guys off the line of scrimmage. And I think Dan Lanning's looking at it and saying, hey, what made Georgia so special the years Dan Lanning was there and they were winning national championships is having these kind of guys on the line of scrimmage. And you kind of look at Emmanuel Hachano too, the second best offensive tackle in the class, right there with Jackson Camwell. Very similar conversation. Now, he's a little bit bigger in terms of just a little bit wider. He goes almost 350. What stands out about Emmanuel is, look, he's 350, but he's still a really good athlete. Maybe not quite the caliber of athlete that Jackson Camwell is, but this kid is really, really powerful too. I saw him, trap bar deadlift, and I ain't much of a weight room guy. He picked up 800 pounds. He's a guy that's going to be he's currently a junior in high school picking up 800 pounds, kind of gives you a sense of just the raw horsepower that this kid brings to the table. And I think what's really cool if you're an Oregon fan is it sounds like Oregon leads for both Jackson Cantwell and Emmanuel. Now, will Oregon land both of them? We'll kind of wait and see there. you feel good about Oregon's chances at least landing one of these guys to go along with Cody Green, who's already committed to Oregon. That would be a very good start to the offensive line class in 2026. And then you look at a guy like Tommy Tofi, massive. This is a guy who more reminds you of a guy like Jaquan McRoy, where you probably got to fix the body a little bit. He looks even bigger than 320 on the film, but he's a better athlete. Clearly, in my opinion, a better athlete, a guy that could play on the inside, probably would be the best on the inside, but certainly gives you that tackle length. Road grader. I mean, just swallows people up with that size. And then you look at another offensive lineman, Kevin Abbott from Idaho, in kind of the exact opposite. He's 6'5", 265, almost looks like a tight end on the football field, long, phenomenal athlete. Now, won't be able to play year one because you got to put some weight on that frame. I mean, that first 12 months when he's in Eugene, if he goes, is going to be eating burritos and working out and lifting weights. Get this kid to 310 pounds, which no doubt he can because that frame is big. He's really, really long. He's got a frame that can handle 310. And what I love most about these kind of guys is you can put the weight on the right way. You know, he comes to Oregon, spends 12 months, nutrition checked, weights checked. He's going to put on the weight the right way and maintain all that athleticism that this kid has. Love what Oregon is doing on the offensive line, and it's becoming so clear. And I think Dan Lanning is noticing it too. Hey, we don't want to have to rely on grabbing 3 starting caliber offensive linemen in the portal every single year. You know, we want to be able to build a pipeline of offensive linemen where even when we do graduate guys like Johnny Cornelius and Harper and Josh Connolly leaving early, we can just refill with the elite prospects we've recruited out of the high school ranks. That's how you want it to look. Maybe not quite there if you're an Oregon fan yet. You close on some of these guys, you're going to be there come 2026 and 2027. And again, Dan Lanning's building this thing, in my opinion, the right way. Gets a lot of flack for using the portal. Look, the transfer portal is an asset to build your program. And you look at that roster Oregon put out in 2024, it's national championship caliber. They didn't play their best football in a big game against Ohio State. That don't mean that Dan Lanning isn't building this thing the right way. Really doing well in the high school ranks, hammering the offensive line in this 2026 class, supplementing it in the transfer portal. That to me is how you want it to look. We'll see how it works. It's going to be a really, again, like we said when Dan Lanning took this job 3 years ago, he's going to try to get to maximize this program on the recruiting trail, and that's exactly what you're seeing play out. And I don't think it's all that crazy to talk about Oregon finishing with the best class in the country in 2026. We'll close it out there. A lot of storylines and fireworks that will be playing out over the next couple of weeks and months. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.